Joe Morgan and Eric Davis both have something in common with Elly De La Cruz.
You are Locked On Reds, your daily Cincinnati Reds podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Reds. My name is Jeff Carr, and I am a lifelong Cincinnati Reds fan. Seriously, got the baby pictures to prove it. And I've been hosting this show now for my 6th season on the daily, because Locked On Reds is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. And every single day, we aim to bring you the biggest stories in Reds country. We'll overreact to the daily motions of the MLB Ocean, and we'll look at some geeky stats as well, because baseball is full of geeky stats. Probably the best sport for it. I'm glad that you're alongside me here today, because we're going to give you some injury updates, including an update on Matt McLain and when his timeline can be expected to return. We're also going to look at why these games against teams like the Marlins and their struggles this season, why they matter so much. But we're going to start out first, of course, with the rarefied air that Elly De La Cruz joined with his performance on Monday night. That's all coming up on today's episode that is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As playoffs wind down, the sport stops sporting like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus every single day. That's right, there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And where we will get started today is with the awesomeness that is Elly De La Cruz. And it wasn't a day that he went off on the base paths. It was a day that he went off at the plate. He had 2 home runs, 2 doubles, and quite frankly, he should be 5 for 5. I think MLB scoring changes should look at the crazy Little League triple that he had. They shouldn't give him a triple, but they should give him a single, because it really looked like he was going to beat out that throw, even if the pitcher for the Marlins, Roddery Munoz, made a good throw. He boots the throw, and Elly would have been safe to first base anyway. I contend he should be 5 for 5. He should have a single, 2 doubles, and 2 homers. Just an absolutely bonkers day, though, even if they don't make the obvious right decision and make that scoring change, because all 4 of his hits, we'll start with this. So the StatCast, one of my favorite things, Baseball Savant, but StatCast, the whole idea of exit velocity and stuff like that, began in 2015. And since then, Elly De La Cruz is the only player to have 4 extra base hits of more than 108 miles an hour. He was hitting the cover off the ball so well. But this adds to his season that we have all said he's taking that step forward, and quite frankly, it was awesome to see. He had a one-on-one sit-down interview with probably the most trustworthy baseball reporter on the planet, in Jeff Passan, and it was a great interview. You know, Jeff Passan, of course, he drops the easy question in there on him, and he said, "Who's the most exciting player on the planet?" And Elly says, "You're sitting right in front of him." Just, yes, 10 out of 10, no notes. But it's great to see how much national attention that he's getting. And on a day, that interview, at least on social media, and I believe on like a show on ESPN or something like that, I saw it on social media, not on TV. But the day that interview drops on the internet, he goes crazy. I don't think that there is any coincidence there. I think Elly loves the big stage, and the more that he is watched, the more that he will shine. I mean, his 2 home runs last night brought him to 20 homers this season. He has 20 home runs and 57 steals. There are only 2 other players in Reds history that had seasons of 20 or more homers and 50 or more steals, and that's Joe Morgan and Eric Davis. Now, both those guys had 20-60 seasons. In fact, Joe Morgan had a 20-60 season in 1973 and 1976, and then Eric Davis had a 20-60 season in 1986. And now, and honestly, Elly's going to join them, knock on wood, fingers crossed, all that stuff. He just needs 3 more steals to join them. And I think he might get that in this series. If he ever hits a single, he might just hit too many extra base hits against the Marlins for him to get a steal. But in this huge, ginormous win where the offense goes off, Elly was the guy that led them. And think about this too. Like, he is just the second Reds player since 1901 to hit 2 doubles and 2 homers in a game. It's only happened twice. It's phenomenal to see. Like, he is doing things that we've never seen before, or at least, unless you're old enough to remember the other time, because it happened back in the 19-teens. And I went to look up who that was, and I must have skipped along in my notes because I didn't write that down. But that was the night for Elly De La Cruz is just more and more proof. Like, I know people are going to cite errors and people are going to cite his deficiencies, and quite frankly, that is just what we do as Cincinnati sports fans. We love to look at the negative. But for 2 seconds, take off the negative goggles, take off the Castellini goggles, and just see the greatness that is Elly De La Cruz. The rest of the league sees it. Other teams, other Locked On hosts in our Locked On MLB sphere. Yes, we have hosts for all 30 teams. They're all just like, dude, what's it like to watch Elly? Do you remember what it was a couple of years ago when we didn't have anybody like that? I mean, Joey Votto was great, but I think Joey Votto was really great at the things of baseball that we don't appreciate. He's a great plate discipline guy, really great at commanding the strike zone. Really great at putting the ball where people weren't and getting good hits. And then, his final couple of years in Cincinnati, the power came up, but then injuries were a problem and stuff like that. So there's so many different things about Joey Votto's game that was a ton of fun, but they weren't as fun as Elly De La Cruz. I don't know, and Griffey was a lot of fun too, but I don't know that I've ever seen a player as fun as Elly De La Cruz because he does everything. And he's only 22. That's the thing about it. And as much as you want to cite an error problem or a strikeout problem, of which the errors are normal. Barry Larkin had a ton of errors when he was just getting going. The errors are normal for major league players at this age, at this point in their career. The strikeouts, maybe those come down a little bit, but I'm not worried about them. Because with all of the strikeouts that he has had, he does all of the things that he does. And he's 22. Just getting started. The youngest Reds player ever to have 4 extra base hits in one game. And I mentioned, the 3 steals away from the 2060 club. Very, very elite club in all of baseball, not just the Reds. It's funny that, if he were to do it, the Reds would have 3 different players because there are only 2 other players ever to do it outside of Reds players. Ricky Henderson did it 3 times because Ricky Henderson was just probably one of the best players that ever played the game. Not probably, he definitely was one of. He's in the conversation for, is he the best player ever? But yeah, I digress. Anyway, getting lost there. Ronald Acuna, of course, did it last year. Joe Morgan did it twice. I mentioned 73 and 76, and Eric Davis did it in 86. Elly could be the 3rd Red ever to join this list. That's it. There's only been 7 other instances in the history of baseball. And we, being Reds fans, know exactly how long that history is because we started professional baseball. And Elly De La Cruz could be just the 8th time that it's ever happened. He would be just the 5th player ever to do it. And all he needs is 3 more steals. I mean, that's where we are with Elly De La Cruz. The eliteness of his performances are starting to be recorded amongst players who are in the pantheon of greatness of baseball. Like, honestly, if Eric Davis didn't have the injury problems that he had, he would absolutely be in the same conversations as Ricky Henderson and Joe Morgan. And Ronald Acuna, he's dealing with injuries as well, but he's definitely on track to be in the pantheon of greatness of baseball. course, he's missed all of this year, so that's kind of opened the door for Elly. Man, I can't wait to see both those guys on the same field next year. That's going to be a lot of fun. But the greatness of Elly knows no bounds, and it's only just beginning. But you know, games like this, on the whole, aren't just important for Elly. In fact, games against teams like the Marlins are super important for the whole team. I mean, just ask Ty France. Get supplies from the site that's made for the skilled trades, SupplyHouse.com. SupplyHouse.com is the reliable way to order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Shop a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from over 400 top brands and get your order delivered right to your door with fast shipping from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Get expert support and industry-leading service from the friendliest folks in the business and talk to a real person every time. Pros in the skilled trades can get a competitive edge by joining SupplyHouse.com's free Trade Master program. Every Trade Master gets access to a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Join the thousands of trade pros already benefiting from their free membership at SupplyHouse.com/TN. And order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies from anywhere with just a few clicks at SupplyHouse.com. Thank you for making Locked On Reds your first listen here today. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On MLB podcast. Host Paul Sullivan, a.k.a. Sully, is here daily to provide national expertise with his trademark humor to help you get ready for the MLB playoffs here in the dog days of summer. Prepare for the Fall Classic with Sully, who has it all covered every single day over at Locked On MLB, available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. And speaking of every day, shout out to our everydayers out there. Appreciate you making us a part of your day here on Locked On Reds. If you're not an everydayer, you can become one by clicking the subscribe button or clicking the subscribe button on your favorite audio podcasting app. If you're not able to watch us on YouTube, you can always take us with you in your car, during your workout, while you do chores, all that great stuff on like iTunes and Spotify and I think Podbean, trying to think of all the different podcasting apps. Literally, if you have a podcasting app, you should be able to find Locked On Reds. And coming up on our next Locked On Reds podcast for you to enjoy, the Reds have had a bit of a down season in the farm system. So the farm system rankings have definitely shifted a lot. We're going to begin looking at those as the dust has settled from the draft and from the trade deadline. So now new rankings can happen. And we'll see just how the new rankings go for this Reds team. I mean, there's definitely going to be some guys that move down. I really don't want to guess as to how far down Connor Phillips has gone, but I gotta believe it's down a bit. He's had a rough year. We're going to talk about him and so many other players on tomorrow's podcast when we look at those rankings. But let's talk about the importance of games against teams like the Marlins, because the overarching theme, and I said it the day before the Marlins game, the Marlins series began, the Reds basically need to sweep this series. They don't just need to win 3 out of 4, they need to win 4 out of 4. The Marlins traded away just about everybody. They have a few major leaguers on their team, but most of their team is made up of either, guys that they picked up off the trash heap to just fill the roster or prospects. They're basically where the Reds were in 2022. And it feels like, honestly, it's not fair to compare the Marlins rebuild to other teams' rebuilds, because the Marlins are always rebuilding. I think the Marlins started rebuilding before it was cool. They're the hipsters of rebuilds. But when it comes to games against guys like the Marlins, you got to show up. You got to show out. You got to get right. And there was a lot of getting right on Monday night. I mean, Jonathan India with a 2-hit game. You had a 3-hit game from Ty France. In fact, this happened almost immediately after I called him out, because there was a play, and it wasn't consequential because, quite frankly, anything that the Reds did when they were in the field wasn't that big of a deal because of how many runs they scored, ending up, winning 10-3. But There was a play where Elly fields a great ground ball, ranging to his left, making a great play, picks it up, throws it. It wasn't a perfect throw, but it was still a catchable throw. Ty France does this scooping action with his right hand that, like, I did when I played first base in high school. The kind of move that you weren't watching the ball, you were never going to catch the ball, and you looked silly trying to do it. And this was after he had, flailed wildly and struck out in his first at bat of the game. And I'm like, okay, the first impressions just aren't great of this guy. He's not been here very long, so it's not fair to say we know who he is, but don't love the first impressions. And I'm not sure how he's going to turn it around. And then boom, he hits a home run. And then he gets 2 more hits. Just a fantastic day for Ty France. And quite frankly, his situation, the Reds have him for another year. If he can get right, I mean, that's going to look like a good move. Again, he falls under the category of, rehab players. I don't want to say, let's not use that. He falls under the category of projects that the Reds seem to love to go get. But if he works out as a project, that's going to be pretty good. And this is a bit of a bummer when you look at his stats, but I talk about him like he can't hit because he has a 224 average. Jeimer Candelario's batting 226. Don't love that comparison there. In fact, I did see, and we're gonna say never mind. There's a stat that I was looking at Jeimer Candelario. All right, we'll say it. Look, we're talking about positive stats, so one quick stat it's a bit of a head turner, and he can still fix this. But right now, here is the list of players that have more wins above replacement than Jeimer Candelario this year. Rhys Hines, Austin Wynns, TJ Friedl, and Santiago Espinal. They all have more WAR than Jeimer Candelario does. Anyway, okay, back to the fun, because the Reds were fun last night. Noelvi Marte hit a homer. Jake Fraley had a couple of hits, including a very nice double down the line that really kind of iced the game. I mean, the game was already pretty much iced, but the Marlins had scored a couple of runs off of Jacob Junis. Talk about a guy that's making a bad first impression. But he scored a couple of runs off of Jacob Junis, and you're thinking, this isn't going to happen, right? They're not going to eke their way back into this. And Jake Fraley made sure that they didn't, as well as Elly's home run there in the 7th inning as well. But man, it's the kind of night that you need. And Nick Martinez taking advantage of it as well. He started the game, and that's, been a bit of a mixed bag this year. Not loving the idea of Nick Martinez the starter. He's been much better as Nick Martinez the relief pitcher. But he pitched 5 innings with 4 hits, no walks, and 5 strikeouts, and no runs allowed. Beautiful start. I said that whenever they announced him as the starter, I thought he'd pitched 4 innings at most, especially because he had a relief appearance on Friday. So he's only pitching on 2 days rest. But that relief appearance was just 1 inning. But still, 5 innings of great work from him. He has been, and I want to do a little bit more of a deep dive into this, so this is more of a tease than it is a point that I want to dive into, but probably later on this week we'll dive into this. He might be the most impressive pitcher on this team outside of Hunter Green. There's multiple reasons as to why, but he might be the most important pitcher outside of Hunter Green, and you might be able to argue that his importance and Hunter Green's importance aren't that far apart. But yes, this was an important game for him to at least, get back on the starting bump and feel like, hey, I can do this. And you had a nice night, a nice inning for Justin Wilson, although he was one of 2 Reds pitchers to issue a walk. But just overall, the kind of night that you really, really need, because for a team like the Reds that we have hammered, and I've hammered, and Steve's hammered, and everybody's hammered, because they've underperformed, because this is supposed to be a year where they're competing for the playoffs, and it feels like they're just on the fringe of doing so. They're not quite in the thick of it like we wanted them to be. And there's so many positive stats that you can look at and say, well, look, they are doing what we want them to do. They're playing well. But there's so many negative stats that are keeping them out of it, including the win-loss record, which is the main stat that matters. But this is the kind of game that an underperforming team like the Reds needs. This is the kind of series that an underperforming team like the Reds needs. Because you play a team like the Marlins, and all of a sudden you're hitting. All of a sudden you're pitching. And all of a sudden, even if you make a few mistakes in the field, it's okay. And I am by no means a good golfer. I just like golf, and I play golf a lot. But there's a thing in golf that sometimes you just need to see the ball go in the hole. And sometimes if you're the Reds, you just need to see runs come across the plate. And yes, this follows their pattern of all or nothing. And who knows, maybe Tuesday night's game is going to be more annoyance than it is, get right. But hopefully they're building momentum off this. This is the kind of game that they should be able to, launch from into the stretch run, into, next week that's going to be very tough as they welcome St. Louis and Kansas City to town, and this weekend as they go to Milwaukee. These are the kind of games that the Reds need to take advantage of the next day, and the next day, and the next week, and the next, Momentum is weird in baseball, but if there is such a thing as momentum in baseball, you build it with series like this. All right, let's shift gears here to a little bit of roster news, because when is Matt McLain coming back anyway? We'll look at some injury updates coming up next. Summertime means baseball takes center stage, and we are in the stretch run, if you call the final 2 months. Really, we're like in stretch run adjacent to the end of the baseball season, but FanDuel's the best place to take advantage of all of that, because all throughout the rest of the season, and as we lead into football season, they might even get some even better promos, but every single day they're going to have boosts, they're going to have promos. We're talking like same game parlay boosts, for the LA parlay. You can add to the LA parlay and make that even more lucrative, but that's all over at FanDuel, because they're hooking up everybody all season long. And I mentioned the LA parlay. We're talking about one or more steals in a game, for each game, one or more steals, one or more runs scored, and 2 or more total bases. Now, he didn't have a steal on Monday night, but he hit all the other ones. But I think we're going to see some steals here. He's going to get to that number 60 and beyond. He's not stopping at 60. But you can check out the LA parlay and pair it with a nice boost or promo or something like that FanDuel's got going on each and every day for the rest of the baseball season. That's over at FanDuel.com. You go there today, add that big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. You can catch every pitch of the Reds' hometown broadcast with SiriusXM. Just download the SXM app and search the word Reds. You'll be able to take the Reds with you wherever you go. And you don't have to worry about if they're on Roku or whatever, because they're always on SiriusXM. Also, make sure you bookmark CincinnatiRedsTalk.com for written content about your Cincinnati Reds. I have a piece up there that I wrote just yesterday, because we constantly hear these quotes, and it's not from just really overly optimistic fans that haven't hit the realism that I've hit. It's not just from, beat writers or somebody like that. Nick Kroll is talking about the Pythagorean win-loss. And more so, he's talking about the run differential, which leads to the Pythagorean win-loss. He's talking about the run differential. And he's talking about it as a reason why they didn't do things at the trade deadline. I only want him worried about wins and losses. And I explain why over at CincinnatiRedsTalk.com. Although that seems kind of obvious. All right, let's look at some injury updates, because there's definitely some guys that we're looking on hopefully getting back here pretty soon. But the biggest one, of course, is Matt McLain. We've missed him all season long, and we kept hearing, yes, he's coming back. We're going to see him. He's going to be back. His expected return is still slated for late August or early September, but there was an update because he's dealing with a setback. And quite frankly, that's a word, and Steve and I have both said this multiple times during the season, whether it be on Q&As or whatever. that if he had a setback, just shut him down. We'll see him in Goodyear next year, because he's coming back from a labrum, left shoulder surgery. He's coming back from a big time surgery. We're not just talking about like he pulled something here. Like, he had to have surgery. It was invasive. They repaired it, all this other stuff. Now, he is awesome. He is an athlete. He is strong. So he's going to do everything he can to get back as fast as he can. But I don't know if that's the best for him. And I'm no doctor, so I'm not making any decisions like that. But just looking at what the Reds have dealt with injuries and players in the past, Nick Senzel, who, by the way, was the last strikeout in the White Sox 21st straight loss, tying the American League record. Ugh, hate that for him. But the way that the Reds have had to deal with injuries in the past, you think they would want to treat this with kid gloves, handling it very conservatively. But they're still listing him as a late August or early September return. His setback was that he suffered a stress reaction in his rib cage, and that just sounds ridiculously painful. And maybe it's something short. And there were reports that, it's nothing crazy, but he is being shut down, like when you turn your computer off, doing nothing for 3 to 7 days. So they're still saying that it's possible he begins a rehab assignment on August 12th. Now, that update came on August 2nd, 3 to 7 days from August 2nd. And they still believe that he will do a rehab assignment on August 12th. Quote from David Bell about this: "Doesn't seem like people are very concerned." I hope that's just because the nature of the injury is the nature of the setback is very mild. And that's probably what he meant. But yeah, I don't know, man. I think at this point, I'd be all for it. If the update came today that they had shut down Matt McLain, we'll see you in February in Goodyear, I think 99% of Reds country would say, yeah, no, that's fine. That figures. And I would too. In fact, I'm kind of rooting for that a little bit. I would love to see him back. I really would. But even if the Reds sweep the Marlins, they've still got a lot of work to do to get back in the playoff race. And I don't know that Matt McLain getting 15 to 20 games of playing time this year is going to make a difference for him. It's certainly not going to make a difference for this team. So why would you risk that? I don't know. I want them to treat that conservatively. They don't tend to do that, so we'll see. All right, there's some other updates as well. Brent Suter is currently on the short-term IL. His estimated return is still a few weeks away. He began throwing on August 2nd. He's 2 to 4 weeks ahead of schedule. David Bell said he's a quick healer. Just saw Deadpool and Wolverine. I don't think he's that quick of a healer, but yeah. If you remember right, an MRI back on July 20th revealed that Brent Suter sustained a partial tear of his teres major muscle. Remember that muscle. That's going to come up here in just a moment. So he was shut down from throwing from 4 to 6 weeks before beginning rehab. That was July 20th. So we're still in the middle of that shutdown. Probably at best case, like 2 weeks from now, he begins a rehab. So we should see him probably late August, early September. Austin Wynns, he also had a teres major tear. But with Luke Maile back, I don't necessarily know that this is that big of a deal. He can kind of come back as he needs to. But he's slated for a September return. There is one guy who we may see here pretty soon. In fact, Emilio Pagan is eligible to be activated from the 60-day IL here in 2 days on August 8th. Now, he's not going to be activated on that day. He is doing a rehab assignment in AAA. I expect that's going to be the full 21 days of rehab because he's been out for so long. Remember when Emilio Pagan was on the Reds? Yeah, it feels like a year ago or 5 years ago. But yeah, he is working back in Louisville, hopefully to get back mid to late August is his estimated timeline. There is an update on Ian Gibaut. Ian Gibaut, man, he has had a year. I remember talking to him in Dayton back in April, and he was saying things like, man, I feel great. This was really more precautionary. Should, have a few appearances in Louisville, and I should be back. And he hasn't pitched at all this year. Remember, he had a major setback. You always say in different injuries, they say, well, he had a minor setback. Ian Gibaut had a major setback, had to have surgery back on May 9th to relieve a compression in a forearm nerve. And it looks like the notes say called the anterior interosseous nerve. I'm sure Steve knows what that is. But yeah, they're saying late August for Ian Gibaut. I would love to see that. This bullpen would love to see that. But just a few injury updates for you here to close out today's show. Thank you so much for making Locked On Reds part of your day. If you're not an everydayer, please hit that subscribe button here on YouTube and on your favorite audio app as you take us with us wherever you go. Take us with you wherever you go. Because we love these Cincinnati Reds. And coming up on the next Locked On Reds podcast, we will discuss the changing prospect rankings. It's been a down year for the Reds. What's that mean for the rankings? But thanks again for making Locked On Reds your first listen today. Now go check out Locked On MLB. Prepare for the Fall Classic with Sully, who has it all covered every single day. You can find the link to Locked On MLB in the description of today's podcast, so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every single day. And you can trust that we will be Locked On Reds every single day.